Welcome everybody. Thank you for joining National Bank of Arizona's Fall 2024 Economic Briefing and Market Update. My name's Brian Gordon. I'm a principal with a company called Applied Analysis, and I'll be sharing our thoughts on the economy with you here today. Why don't we go ahead and dive right in? Today's topic is designed to cover what some of the broader employment trends are. Obviously, what's happening in the national economy has been pretty significant in terms of the overall performances, more generally, but also specifically within the state of Arizona. And so that's where we thought it might be a good point to share some of the key topics that are most relevant as it relates to what's happening in the overall job market, including overall productivity that's taking place in the economy, labor market conditions just generally, and then we'll do a little bit of a deeper dive on key sectors of the overall employment market and where we're seeing growth. A new topic that we wanted to share with you relates to cybersecurity and some of the things we're seeing there and expectations on a go-forward basis. So let's just go right into some of the details here. I think this is really important in terms of setting the stage where we are from an economic perspective in the state of Arizona. We've seen our GDP, or gross domestic product, essentially increased by about 17.6% over the last 4 to 5 years, or the pre-COVID period to today. On a quarterly basis, we've continued to see those edge up in real terms. These are inflation-adjusted terms when you want to think about the overall contributions to goods and services that are taking place in the economy. So pretty significant growth overall. And if we take a little bit of a longer view on an annual basis, going back to that prior pandemic period, you can see that the state of Arizona ranked number 3rd in terms of the greatest level of overall economic activity during that same time frame. States like Florida and Idaho have beat us out in terms of overall production, but still we're well ahead of what the United States average is, just hovering above 9% during that same time frame. And if we think about what's happened in the last year, we look at this on a quarter-by-quarter basis, we are starting to see some slip, if you will, in terms of how the overall Arizona economic climate is performing from a growth perspective, with GDP expanding by about 2.5% overall, puts us right in the middle of the pack. Nationally, you see the national average there of about 3%. Nonetheless, you can see some of those states that are sort of outperforming the broader averages on a year-over-year basis. And if we take a look at where we've sort of been historically compared to the United States, I think this is also important to note where we're at today. Again, sort of on par with national metrics, but where we've been over the last 20 years or so, the state of Arizona has generally outperformed what we see across the United States. Obviously, Arizona is a high growth state. We see a lot of population in migration. We've seen a lot of strong employment growth. All of that has contributed to above average GDP growth estimates year in and year out. Only a few periods where the national economy has really outperformed what we've seen from a local perspective, and that was what I would refer to as that post-Great Recession era, when Arizona was a little bit slower to recover, partially because we were just simply harder hit during that time frame, but we've continued to expand going forward. And if we take a look at really the sources of the growth in the overall economy during the past several years, I don't know that much is surprising here, as we see a lot of the growth taking place in service-related sectors of the economy. So professional and business services has expanded by about 1/3 during that time frame. Information sector has also increased. Finance and real estate, no surprises there. Construction obviously is a high flyer given the amount of investments that we've continued to see in the economy. We'll talk a little bit more about that as we move forward. Education and health services as well. You can sort of see where we've seen the broader growth across the Arizona economy. That said, projected GDP growth is likely to be linked with slower labor force growth into the future, particularly nationally. When we take a look at this by decade and we think about the amount of growth that's taken place, real GDP CAGR, that's your compounded annual growth rates by decade. And you can see that the growth is expected over the next 10 years to be slower than it has been historically. But you also see here, pretty importantly, that the growth rates in overall labor force is also expected to slow around the country as we move forward over the next decade. And if we look at the state of Arizona and that overall economic activity on a per employee basis, we've started to see that flatten out a bit in inflation-adjusted terms at about $132,000 worth of GDP on a per employee basis, essentially flat over the last couple of years. Obviously, spikes coming out of the COVID pandemic for obvious reasons, including federal stimulus funds and all sorts of other activity taking place during that time. Also, the comparisons to when the economy had shut down. If we also look at per capita personal incomes, we've continued to see those rise pretty strong on a year-over-year basis, growing at about 6% overall during the past year. And when we look at it on an inflation-adjusted or real terms basis, still up almost 2% on a year-over-year basis. So continuing to see some growth there in terms of overall incomes on a per-person basis. So that sets the stage a little bit from how the overall economy is performing. Let's talk a little bit about what we're seeing from a labor market standpoint and some of the sort of key themes that come to mind when we think about the job market. One area we like to focus our time and attention is looking at the relative ratio between the number of jobs there are relative to the overall population. And if we look at just the segment of the population that are in there, what we refer to as their prime earning ages from 25 to 54, you can get a sense here that these metrics are suggesting they're at a 20-year plus high in terms of overall, I'll call it participation, if you want to think about it that way, in terms of the jobs relative to the overall population growth. So we're seeing more and more people get back into the overall labor force. And when we look at this nationally, you see the unemployment rates are hovering around where they were pre-pandemic. We have yet to see that labor force participation rate, the number of folks that are getting back into the market overall, not just in those age working years. But you can get a sense that about 2/3 of folks are now participating in the overall labor force. And then we've got some folks outside of the labor force that have essentially given up, but would still prefer to work if they had that opportunity. And if we look locally, what's happening in Arizona, the overall unemployment rate has really fallen like a rock as of late, and we've seen overall unemployment levels lower than where we were pre-pandemic. That's the demonstration of a strength in the economy. We're also seeing that labor force participation rate locally has also ramped up a little bit from where it was pre-pandemic and on a pretty sharp upturn there on a relative basis. Again, the scale there is relatively tight, but you get a sense that we're starting to see some upward pressure in that regard. And if we compare nationally what we're seeing in terms of job openings relative to the number of people that are looking for work, we're starting to see this come a little bit more in balance. Historically, we've seen unemployment levels hovering above the number of job openings that are out there. And then leading into the pandemic, we had actually reversed course. Then we saw what happened during the height of the pandemic, and now we're starting to see those job openings come down while the level of unemployment rate is ticking up a little bit, the folks that are out looking for jobs. So we're starting to see this look a little bit more balanced relative to those two particular metrics. And locally, we're seeing a little bit of divergence in the last few months in terms of the number of job openings starting to spike up and those that are unemployed coming down even further. So that's related to that 3+% overall unemployment rate. There's just fewer folks out there looking for work today. So the labor market's been pretty tight as a whole in the state of Arizona. Unemployed persons per job opening, we've seen these moderate a little bit. I don't need to go in a whole lot of detail, but in the state of Arizona, we're outperforming what's happening in the nation as a whole. And if we look at where we sort of stack up in the lower half, ranked at about 20 across the United States, you see some areas with higher unemployment rates like California, Illinois, Washington, and Nevada, all reporting higher levels of unemployed persons on a per job opening basis. So we're doing okay here in the local market. We also like to look from time to time at Indeed, the online listing service for job openings and job postings. Those numbers have moderated over the years, but you can see that the overall job postings are now starting to trend down a little bit, as well as the new job postings on a month-by-month basis have trended down just a little bit as it relates to that larger sort of employment website where people tend to seek out jobs. And you can see the declines here. We're at a little bit of a greater rate of decline than the US average overall. And so fewer and fewer job postings there. The hire and quit rates are also sort of trending downward as we move into this post-pandemic environment. and you look at the delta there between those two metrics, between hire rate and quit rate, we're starting to see that gap start to close. As my office likes to refer to this is the wave we saw post-pandemic. On the right, the variance between those two metrics, again, starting to close the gap a little bit. And if we look locally, we're seeing that gap close a bit more, with the overall hire rate at about 3.8% and the quit rate dropping below where it has been over the last couple of years at about 2.5% overall. So we're continuing to see some tightness in the overall labor market. Average weekly wages, U.S. versus the overall economy in the United States. Again, the trend lines have been fairly consistent here, and Arizona is sort of keeping pace, if you will, from a wage standpoint, at least the trend lines relative to the U.S. average. And we're seeing wage growth stronger and more equal during the Great Recession recovery period. The darker areas are just the current recovery, a little bit more balanced there. And you saw wage earners in the high end of the market doing a little bit better coming out of the Great Recession. So a little bit of a mixed message there, but more distribution and evenly distributed wage recovery, if you will, in the overall labor market. Let's just jump into some of the sector by sector growth. I think it's important to talk about what's happening in the job market right at home. We've got about 3.3 million people that are employed today in the state of Arizona. We're up pretty good from where we were during the height of the pandemic. We've added about 600,000 jobs overall. And if we think about pre-pandemic, we're still up about 260,000 positions from where we were at the beginning of 2020. And if we look at growth rates over the last decade, Arizona has no question been a high flyer, ranking number 4 in terms of the overall job performances behind areas like Idaho, Utah, and Nevada. Again, some of those areas are also reporting some strength in the overall economy, but Arizona ranks number 4 and is essentially doubled up the level of employment growth that we've experienced at the national level. And if we look just over the last year, you can see that Arizona slipped just a little bit down to number 11, but overall job growth has remained positive at 2.1%. Importantly, if we think about coming out of the pandemic and how the economy has performed, the state of Arizona has reported 41 straight months of year in and year out overall employment growth, pretty impressive from that standpoint, and continues to report some stability in the overall job market. We've added 66,000 jobs during the past 12 months, and we've seen in a pretty good distribution across the board. Here is the makeup or the composition of the Arizona job market, a pretty well distributed profile in terms of the jobs from largest to smallest in terms of their relative contributions here. I don't need to go through each one of these, but I am going to hit some high points relative to that. The overall diversity index, we refer to this as the Hochman index, the person that invented this. Nonetheless, this is just demonstrating how each economy compares to the national average. State of Arizona ranks number 7, a well-diversified economy with a score of about 98 points. 100 would be the national sort of broader diversity index. So doing really well from that standpoint. And you can see the trend lines historically. Diversity of the employment base has been pretty impressive in Arizona. And if we look at growth on a year-over-year by sector basis, you can kind of see coming out of the pandemic in that spring of 2020, obviously the job market was much cooler. Then we started to see things pick up. And now we've seen some moderation in different sectors of the economy. Yet you see areas like private education and health services has remained a little bit hotter as of late. You see some government-related areas there where it's been stronger in the 2024 period. We'll get a little bit of a deeper dive here on each one of these. But if we look at the sector growth in percent terms in the last 12 months, you can see where some of that stronger growth is. Let's keep in mind mining and logging is a relatively small sector of the economy, so don't read too much into that one. We're going to talk about absolute growth as well. But overall, here's your 2.1% job growth. And if we look at it in terms of, I'll call it absolute growth during the last 12 months, this is the one. Private education and health services added 30,000 jobs during the last year. Professional and business services up almost 13,000. Trade, transportation and utilities, construction, financial activities. Really going to focus in on these top 5 that have been the key contributors to the overall economy, adding essentially all of the overall jobs, the others sort of netting themselves out on the bottom end of the spectrum. I'm just going to talk about each one of these, at least hit some high points to give you some color around what's driving some of that growth and what we've experienced in each one of these. The private education and health services sector has been one of the fastest growing in not only the state of Arizona, but nationally as well. This is a very common theme and trend that we've seen across the board. The number of establishments within this sector in Arizona has also ramped up pretty dramatically in the last few years. No surprises, the healthcare industry is flourishing. And key components within that, if we want to think about the contributions to that growth within each sector, the two sort of key subsectors are education, obviously, and the other half being healthcare and social assistance. Almost 4 out of 5 jobs that have been added in this sector have been in the health-related field, not necessarily private education, although that did account for 1 out of every 5 jobs. We've also seen pretty strong upward pressure over the last decade in terms of average weekly wages in this particular sector. So there's been more demand for healthcare-related services as our population continues to age, and obviously the experiences we've had during the pandemic, some of that has been a key contributor, but there has been significant demand in overall health-related services. The annual growth in health services spending has been higher than before it was during the pandemic, and 1 out of 5 residents in the state of Arizona is age 65 and older. So as we continue to age up, we will continue to see investments being made in the healthcare industry. And if we think about the share of spending taking place for those 65 plus, they account for over 1/3 of all the spending, despite accounting for only 17.7% of all the people that live in the state. That should give you a sense of sort of some of the key trends there. And then if we look at those occupations within the sector that are really going to contribute to future gains in that particular sector going forward. This is just nationally the top 10 fastest growing occupations. And I've highlighted for you in the green color those areas that are specifically related to healthcare. I don't need to read all of these for you, but you get the idea. We are expecting to see significant gains in the health-related fields in these particular occupations. And then if we think about the education requirements for each one of these positions, masters, bachelors, and associates for different elements within that healthcare field, that is going to be critically important when we think about capturing those jobs going forward. Educational attainment that I'm referring to, Arizona is sort of middle of the pack in terms of a bachelor's degree or higher. About 1/3 of the folks have a bachelor's degree or higher, on par with the national average, and kind of see where we rank in other markets in the country. Nonetheless, we also have a high rate of certifications that a lot of workers within the state have and possess. That increases the rate of, I'll call it educational attainment, up to about half of folks that either have some sort of college degree or certification. So a highly educated or certified workforce in the state is critically important. The next sector I want to focus on for a couple of minutes, professional and business services, adding 13,000 jobs during the last 12 months. Almost 500,000 folks work within that particular sector. And subsets of that include professional, scientific, and technical services, management of company, administrative, and other services. That includes temp workers on the far right. They accounted for about 40% of the overall job gain. So did those technical positions. As a key contributor to job gains in the last 12 months. Wages have also been on the rise in this particular sector. The third one I wanted to focus on, the third fastest or largest contributor to job gains in the last 12 months, is a little bit of a mixed bag here with trade, transportation, and utilities. This includes a few different elements. Nonetheless, you get a sense it's over 600,000 folks employed in the state. This includes wholesale trade as well as your retail trade, so front-facing with the customer retail segment of the market, and then transportation, warehousing, and overall utilities are included in that. The biggest piece being that wholesale trade component. So I think you're going to get a sense of what that looks like here, and then some distributions between retail as well as wholesale and warehousing related activity. Global e-commerce market is also continued to expect, it is continuing to grow into the future. We expect that to continue to have an impact in terms of this particular sector of the economy, including in Arizona's wages have continued to rise in this particular segment. And you get a sense of what annual pay looks like there. Construction added about 5,700 jobs in the last 12 months. Nationally, this has been continuing to expand in terms of the overall investments being made. And if we look at this, over 200,000 folks employed in the construction sector locally, edging up by about 4.5% on a year-over-year basis. And if we look at growth rates over the last decade, construction is the leader, just given the phenomenal amount of growth that's taken place in the state of Arizona. Big numbers there. And if we think about the last decade, we're adding about almost 10,000 jobs on a year in and year out basis during the last decade. Pretty impressive. Part of that, the contributions are coming from the industrial sector. We're seeing the Phoenix area in particular is leading the nation in terms of active industrial development activity. So substantial amounts of warehouse and distribution facilities are popping up all over the Phoenix area and has been a key hub for distribution related activity. And we look at the construction sector, if you will, job openings relative to the higher rate is continuing to sort of moderate a little bit, but those job openings are increasing. So construction companies are looking more and more for folks with more openings popping up every day. Some of that relates to the fact that we're starting to see an aging workforce and a little bit of a shift in terms of what type of work people are looking to do. The share of construction versus all industries, you can kind of see younger folks really aren't migrating into that construction sector like they used to. And so starting to see some significant shortages there when we think about, at least nationally, some of the areas that are experiencing these, what we refer to as these serious shortages. You can see carpenters, those sorts of things are really getting impacted by, I'll call it a shift in terms of where people are looking to work. And overall, it's sort of running the gamut here in terms of the areas that are experiencing some, I'll call it tightness in some of those trades within the construction industry. The fifth fastest largest contributor to the overall job market is financial activities, adding almost 5,000 jobs during the past year, just over 250,000 folks through the end of 2023. It actually edged back up in the most recent data. So we've seen this bounce around a little bit. It's moderating because of probably what you all are feeling, especially thinking about what's happening at the National Bank of Arizona and the industry that it operates in. There's just been some adjustments that have taken place overall. Finance and insurance is a key component, as well as real estate. And so no surprises here, probably where we're seeing some of the gains across the board, a little bit of a 75-25 split there between finance and insurance and the real estate sector. So what's happening there is interest rates have been sort of, I'll call it spiking and now moderating a little bit in terms of what the Federal Reserve is doing. We saw those rates come down by about half a point. We may see another half point discount in the federal funds rate, maybe by the end of the year. We'll see how that ultimately plays out. We saw it benefit overall mortgage rates, but we saw a little bit of spike as some of that reduction was, I suppose, built into the system already. And then if we think about wages, the growth has been a little bit more moderate in some of the more recent periods, but nonetheless above average earnings from that particular standpoint. So that gives you a kind of I'll call it the top five. I just took the largest contributors to the overall job market in the last 12 months and just wanted to hit some of those high points for you. Our team also took a look at some anomalies that we were seeing and really some demand, high levels of demand in the cybersecurity sector of the job market. A few webinars ago, we talked a little bit about AI and some of the things that we're experiencing there. We wanted to bring some of the cybersecurity topic to you. This has been obviously in the headlines a lot more, and we thought maybe having some of this as a reference point would be useful. Clearly, what we've been experiencing from a data security, cybersecurity standpoint has impacted all of us at some level, but this has really become more pronounced day in and day out. Some of the top risks associated for businesses globally. This is just a key area of focus by nearly every business that operates around the world. And when they rank some of the risks that they're experiencing, this is number one. Regulatory and some of these others are somewhat related as it relates to cybersecurity, but you get a sense there are a number of areas that businesses are concerned about, but nothing outpaces their concerns over cybersecurity. So let's just take a look at a couple of the data points behind all of this. Data compromises in the U.S. has essentially, I'll call it, doubled during the past year relative to where we were a year ago. And I expect these trends to probably continue going forward. And then you talk about the number of compromises and the number of people that are impacted by some of these things. You get a sense data breaches have been substantial. Yes, the number of victims exceeds the number of people that live in the United States, but there are multiple companies that have multiple people on the same list, so that you get a sense of how that plays out. The only point I really wanted to make here is that this is real and it's affecting people on a day in and day out basis, as well as attacks on supply chains and things of that nature. But when you talk to compliance professionals within these organizations, you can kind of see where they believe that their expertise lies, and you don't see a whole lot of folks on the expert or advanced spectrum. So I think this is where we're seeing the shortage from a cybersecurity workforce standpoint, and I think this only needs to continue to improve as we go forward. And then some of the industries that have been impacted by some of these cyber attacks. You get a sense of what that looks like. Healthcare, financial services, things of that nature have been highly impacted by cyber attacks, and they are squarely focused on continuing to try to combat that type of activity. Globally, there's an estimate of nearly 4 million short in terms of cyber professionals overall. You get a sense of some of the key metrics surrounding that type of information. Nationally, we're looking at probably somewhere around 750,000 in terms of cyber professionals that we still require to meet the demands of the day. Again, a little bit scary in terms of the lack of labor that exists in this particular sector, something we're going to have to, again, spend more time on and see how this industry ultimately unfolds. But thought it was particularly interesting to see some of those metrics in terms of how much damage can be done, how many people are impacted. And frankly, when we're talking about the job market, this is one area that probably needs some increased attention and focus. This runs through every industry within the economy and every one of our businesses. So I'll just wrap up. Let's just talk a little bit about what we're seeing in terms of looking forward. Look, I think we probably are estimating that at least in the near term, we'll continue to see some stability overall, nationally as well as locally in the state of Arizona. We want to be cognizant of what's happening in terms of the geopolitical environment and what ultimately could unfold there. And that could certainly play a role over the mid and long term. We want to keep an eye on that. One area that I think we've talked about in prior webinars with National Bank of Arizona is really about the consumer and the sustainability of the consumer to be able to continue to pay premiums, the inflationary environment that they've continued to face. That's played a role in terms of their wallet and how they spend money. What that ultimately looks like on a longer run basis will be telling in terms of how overall economic activity is impacted, and we'll see how sustainable those trends are going forward. But I guess I would probably just close with the fact that the overall fundamentals of the Arizona economy remain relatively stable. They remain relatively strong, and we'll expect to continue to see that stability heading into 2025 from where we sit today, barring some of those other potential headwinds that loom on the horizon, but have yet to see that have a material impact as we sit here today. So that concludes really my remarks, and hope we've had a chance to share with you some insightful trends, some new sort of evolving mix of job growth that we necessarily weren't seeing prior to the pandemic, as we've seen the economy continue to adjust. And keep an eye out going forward for our next newsletter that comes out, future webinars, and just want to thank the folks at National Bank of Arizona for the opportunity, and I'm sure you'll be able to reach out to your contacts there if you have any follow-up questions, and look forward to staying in touch with you. Take care, everybody.